Hi, and welcome to Mary Trump Live. Mary's out today. I'm Brian Karam, and once again, thanks for letting me sit in with you guys. It's always a lot of fun. Today, President Donald Trump claimed he's going to war with Venezuela. Well, drug war with Venezuela. Well, he's sending in the CIA. Well, he's going to bomb some stuff. He flew over with some B-52s. Meanwhile, he's working for peace in Ukraine, and he spoke today with his BFF and mentor, Vlad the Impaler Putin, and he really believes Vlad is serious this time about ending the war in Ukraine. He's really serious this time. He swears it. Sure he is. Meanwhile, Trump is seriously deep into his revenge tour. His DOJ today indicted former National Security Advisor John Bolton for apparently mishandling classified documents. Doesn't get any better than that. Let's dive in. That's right. We have some breaking news this evening. CNN reports that the Justice Department has indicted John Bolton, National Security Advisor during Donald's first term. Bolton has since become a very vocal critic of the Trump regime. The charges are related to his handling of classified documents, and those charges were handed down by a grand jury in Maryland. Bolton is just the latest in a growing list of Puff Donnie's political enemies to be indicted by his DOJ. And with this one, you gotta laugh. I mean, it was who was it? Will Rogers, who said the comedians have become serious and the politicians have become comedians. And it really is comedic that Donald Trump, a man who mishandled so badly those classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, would have someone indicted for mishandling classified documents who actually knew how to handle classified documents. Toy boat. Anyway, here we go. Meanwhile, the government shutdown is now in its third week, as previously reported. Puff Donnie the Magnificent took the unprecedented step of permanently laying off some of the government workers and hinted that he would hunt for those who were Democrats to lay off first. But today, a federal judge had something to say about that plan. Here's CBS Chicago with the latest on this.
This morning, the U.S. Senate is set to vote for a 10th time on funding bills to reopen the federal government. But as the shutdown stretches into day 16, the livelihoods of thousands of federal workers hang in limbo. A federal judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration from firing Fed employees during the stalemate, saying the move appears to be politically motivated and likely illegal. 4,000 government workers have already received layoff notices. Wednesday, the president's budget chief threatened there could be more.
I think we'll probably end up being north of 10,000.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention was hit with hundreds of layoff notices last weekend.
We're witnessing an all-out Republican assault on the health care of the American people.
A Health and Human Services Department spokesperson claims the layoffs target bloated bureaucracy. Meanwhile, President Trump has ordered the Pentagon to pay service members, likely using unspent Defense Department funds.
We got the people that we want paid.
FBI Director Kash Patel says FBI agents will also be paid during the shutdown, though he didn't say where the funds will come from.
Maybe they'll just print them. Look, likely to be politically motivated. Donald Trump said himself they were politically motivated. And while you may find the money to pay the military, you know what's going to make the difference in this shutdown? It's going to be the TSA people and the air traffic controllers. Because when air traffic control comes to a standstill in the United States, somebody better budge, because at the end of the day, that will destroy the economy. So let's pay attention to what happens in this next week. Tonight, there was a vote, and of course, the Senate didn't pass anything, and that's because nobody's talking to each other. Anyway, Donald and his regime keep trying to blame the shutdown on the Democrats. But of course, he controls the White House, the Senate, and of course, even the Supreme Court. He could sign off on a deal that would end this shutdown. But the fact of the matter is, no one is even going to Donald Trump's office to talk about it. We've seen guidance from the White House for the last few days. Donald Trump is meeting with no one to try and shut this down. And in an interview with MSNBC, Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan elaborated on that point. Listen and take a look.
We don't need to negotiate through the press. I don't need to watch, Senator Thune on TV in order to find out what he says he's offering Democrats. Just get in a room like adults do, and we can have this, out. It's going to start with health care, and I think he's said he's open to that. Great. Adults get in a room. They throw out the press. No offense. They throw out Twitter, and they just get to working, and that's the point that isn't happening. And no matter what Mr. Thune offers, I'm sorry, I got to know that President Trump is on board, because it's not enough anymore to take the word of Speaker Johnson or Senator Thune, because they have to go check with the big guy in the White House. So to me, this negotiation is about, frankly, going with the White House and having that debate, that negotiation together, so that we're not just like twiddling our thumbs here when Thune gets overruled or Johnson gets overruled.
Yeah. Adults in a room, that's not Donald. But the fact of the matter is, you're not going to get this done until you get in a room. I've covered, I think, maybe 6 of these shutdowns. The first ones, for our first 200 years, we didn't even have shutdowns. I think Reagan had the first one. I may have covered one of the 2 that he had. I think Clinton had a few, but most of them have occurred during Donald Trump. And every time when a shutdown occurs, the leaders of the House and the Senate, all the leadership on both sides of the aisle, right? Democrats, Republicans, get into a room, like the senator from Michigan said, and they hash out the problems. You really don't want to be in that room after about 16 hours. It smells like beer, stale pizza, and cigarettes and feet. But they do it. They get in there and they work it out. They take it to the president. The president signs off on it, and then it's done. But as she said, and pay attention, the one guy who won't be an adult in the room is Donald Trump, and he's the guy that's got to sign off on it. Anyway, federal workers aren't the only Americans getting ripped off and laid off because of the shutdown. Donald's cut funding for agencies and projects, and that means no longer will they be able to help communities and save lives. The New York Times reports that the Trump regime is shifting disaster recovery responsibility away from FEMA and onto the states. This leaves many struggling communities to fend for themselves. Recently, Cave City, Arkansas was hit by a horrible tornado that caused millions in damage. The town's requests for FEMA aid were denied. Mayor Jonas Anderson said the city had to shoulder $300,000 in recovery costs. That's about 15% of its annual budget. Look, folks, this is why FEMA exists, to help out these communities for such emergencies. Anderson added that FEMA provided only limited assistance to individual residents. That's pretty sad. Similar struggles are playing out across the country. FEMA is delaying disaster declarations, withholding funds, and scaling back grant programs meant to help communities prepare. Look, this is FEMA got a bad rap because sometimes they're slow to get things going, and that's because they were underfunded to begin with. FEMA does descend into a community, and I've seen them work from hurricanes in the Carolinas and Texas and Florida up, the Panhandle through the East Coast. They work hard, but when they get hit with multiple problems at once and multiple disasters, they're slow to do it. That's not a sign that you get rid of FEMA. That's a sign that you give FEMA needs more money, and they won't do it. Donald's also taking aim at a $16 billion railroad project. I just can't. ABC 7 has more on this, so take a look.
The Trump administration had already said it was going to freeze infrastructure funding for projects. But yesterday, President Trump took it a step further, saying it was terminating the Hudson River Gateway Tunnel project. That project is a $16 billion project that's already experienced some delays and bumps in the road. And the project would build a new rail tunnel under the Hudson River while the existing tunnel is being rehabilitated, ultimately creating 4 tracks into and out of New York. Now, the new tunnel is slated to open in 2035, and the entire project, including fixing the old tunnel that was damaged by Hurricane Sandy, is expected to be completed by 2038. But now the president says that project has been terminated. It's not immediately clear if the Hudson River Gateway Tunnel project, along with other major projects like the extension of the 2nd Avenue subway line, have already been stripped of federal funding. But both of those projects rely heavily on that money.
Let's see. New York. You wonder why Donald terminated those projects? Political revenge. That's all this is. It doesn't help any of the people out, but New York is notoriously a blue state. Donald Trump isn't liked very well in New York. Why do you think he did it? Revenge. Folks, that's what Donald Trump is all about. Revenge. And speaking of that, yesterday, dozens of reporters who cover the Pentagon walked out of the facility. They did this to protest new restrictions imposed by Defense Secretary Pete, I love my makeup mirror, Hegseth. Here's the Associated Press with more on that story.
It was moving day at the Pentagon today, but it wasn't a happy one for reporters. Reporters, dozens of them, turned in their access badges and moved out of the Pentagon rather than agree to new restrictions on how they work imposed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The Pentagon wanted them to sign off on new rules that would subject them to being thrown out of the building just for reporting on things that the Defense Secretary has not approved previously. Journalists from outlets like the Associated Press and the New York Times refused to let their reporters sign the new agreements. Even some outlets that appeal to conservative viewers like Fox News Channel and Newsmax said they would not agree to the new rules. The journalists say they will continue to report on the U.S. military, but it isn't clear how much their lack of access will hinder them.
I got news for you. It might actually help them. Not being in that building and have all eyes on you might be a good thing, and you can meet your sources off-site, and they will, and there will be people inside the Pentagon who will want to inform the reporters. Nonetheless, this is an extension of the revenge tour that Donald Trump has had against the press since his first administration. He tried to kick me out. He tried to kick out Jim Acosta. Jim sued him once and beat him. I had to sue him 3 times and beat him all 3 times in court. Stand your ground against this bully. This is another example of Donald Trump wanting to make sure that if you don't say what he wants to hear, then you can't say it at all. And folks, that's not what democracy is about, and that's certainly not what journalism is about. They're there to put their best foot forward, and I've got nothing against Pete Hegseth or the President of the United States putting forth their best foot forward, right? And having their spokespeople say what they want us to hear. My job is to find out what it is that's actually going on, and you're not going to end that by trying to keep us away from our sources. You're only going to make your world worse. I guarantee it. And it's not going to help out anybody who wants real news either. If you want propaganda, yeah, you're going to listen to Fox, or you're going to, well, hell, they won't even be there, OAN or Newsmax or whoever it is that will kiss the ring. But the rest of us will be finding out real news. And when you put us up against the wall, let's see what a real reporter will do. Because I recommend you send the crime beat reporters, experienced crime beat reporters, to the Pentagon and to the White House, because there's enough crime going on there. Anyway, Donald's hostile ICE takeover continues in places like Chicago and Portland. Tensions are still rising between residents and agents. Because of growing violence and use of tear gas from agents in Chicago, a judge just made a ruling today to protect citizens. Here's CBS Chicago with more.
Judge ruled that immigration agents in Chicago must now wear body cameras. The decision comes after the judge said she saw tear gas like this situation on the east side. She also cited other tactics used against protesters during TV coverage. It also happened to journalists outside of the ICE facility in Broadview. The judge previously said agents needed to wear ID badges and ban them from using certain riot control techniques against peaceful protesters and journalists.
Yeah, and if you don't like that, they'll shoot the priest in the head with a pepper ball. Meanwhile, it seems like Donald's crusade is far from over. In fact, he has a new target, the city of brotherly love, San Francisco. The summer of love was in San Francisco. Man, that city's still filled with hippies. But here's ABC News with more on Donald's new target.
And President Trump is vowing to expand his crime crackdown to more Democrat-led cities. In a rare Oval Office event with FBI Director Kash Patel, Trump said San Francisco is another target on his list.
So I'm going to be strongly recommending, at the request of government officials, which is always nice, that you start looking at San Francisco. I think we can make San Francisco. There's one of our great cities 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now it's a mess. And we have great support in San Francisco.
No, you don't, Don. That's another lie. I think there's a great place for Donald in San Francisco, but it's in the middle of the bay and it's an island. And there was a movie about it, Escape from. Yep. I would love to see Alcatraz be Donald's future home. He can have a 1 or 2, golf course there. And he only has to wear orange for a couple hours a day. And, people who come to visit Alcatraz can see him behind a cage and take a picture of themselves with him. I would love it if that were his future, or even Stephen Miller's. Anyway, Republicans these days really hate free speech, and that goes without saying, but we're going to say it. They're doing everything in their power to brand this Saturday's No Kings protest as an I Hate America rally. What's hatred of America? We grew up. That's the reason why we separated from Britain, right? We didn't want a king, but apparently that's anti-American today. In fact, the Republicans have been on a press tour this week, according to Democrats and others, spreading lies and propaganda talking points. And just take a look at what Republican Senator Barrasso had to say on Fox.
They have this big I Hate America rally that's this Saturday in Washington and across the country, where you have all these far left activist groups coming to protest the president and the administration. I mean, that's who's running the party, and Chuck Schumer is completely beholden to them. He has a leash around his neck. They've orchestrated this shutdown.
The only guy with a leash around his neck would be Barrasso. Let me just lay some facts on you about this particular story. They get talking point memos. Everything that guy just said has been written on a cue card or a piece of paper for him to spit back out at the rest of us. And you can see that in everything that is said. It makes no sense to call a No Kings rally a I Hate America rally. America was built on the idea that we don't want a king. Right now, the Republicans are all in with Donald because they're complicit in his corruption. And the one thing that Donald doesn't want to see is this shutdown to end or the House to go in session. And there's a reason for that, because the day the House goes back into session, they will have to swear in a Democrat, giving the House the majority they need to do what? Release the Epstein files. Say it with me 3 times. It's kind of like Beetlejuice. Epstein files, Epstein files, Epstein files. Everything that you're seeing, the supposed war in Venezuela, the peace efforts in Ukraine, all of this is part and parcel Donnie pushing, but he has a second idea in mind, and that's to make sure you never see the Epstein files, let alone talk about them. It's scaring him to death. And by the way, the Mar-a-Lago files, which I filed suit against the administration to get, are also now on his mind. Why? Because he just indicted Bolton for messing with classified documents. So, Donnie, let's see what you have in your deck. What do you have when it comes to classified files? To hell with Bolton. What about those submarine plans? What about what you showed Iran? I want to know. And by God, since you declassified them, they're now public record. Let's get them. Anyway, that brings us with today's emotional support moment. Boy, don't we need it. Just in time. Over several days last weekend, the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta, I just like saying that, Balloon Fiesta, was in full effect. From Balloon Fiesta Park, KOAT News 7 crews captured the serene moments of liftoff and light to bring us the quiet beauty of the amazing and often quirky balloons in action as the morning skies became a burst of drifting color. Let's watch. That's actually pretty cool. But I'm going to confess to you, I have a balloon festival I like better. And that is if you ever get to Louisville, Kentucky, got to say it right. If you're not from there, they'll know. If you don't call it Louisville instead of Louisville, but call it Louisville. If you ever get to Louisville for the week of Kentucky Derby, the Great Balloon Race is really, really cool. So with that, let's go to your comments. First of all, I did see one that said, if the news wasn't so sad, it would be great comedy. And it was Will Rogers who said that in this day and age, the comedians have become serious and the politicians have become comics. And that's not too far from true. So with that said, we'll go to your comments. I've got them here on the side. I'll go through them, Lexi, but you put them up if you want. Barbara, new member. Thanks for becoming a new member. Midas Cheryl gifted 1 Mary Trump Media membership. Dorothy Reed. So how do I get my membership card to Antifa? Well, I don't know. In Donnie's mind, you just go downtown and register at your local Democratic Party office. But, you know, that's BS. Sheila 3444, $2 super sticker. Thank you, Sheila. Colleen, I think they are planning something to break the Dems on Saturday. I've heard that as well. I've heard that they're going to plant people in there and try to make it dangerous and violent. And they may well. But here's the thing. Look, these things are, you know, these type of protests aren't my deal. I go to the White House and I try to fight this one-on-one. But I encourage everyone who feels strongly about this to get out there and protest. And I mean, everybody, show your strength and don't be violent. Just be peaceful. It is the right of the people for peaceable assembly. There's an amendment about that, and it's the First Amendment. So express your First Amendment rights by peaceably assembling and protesting, because that is your right. Use it. FYI, leaked DHS and FBI intelligence bulletin obtained by journalist Ken Klippenstein that warns local law enforcement to treat this Saturday's No King protest marches as potential terrorist threats. Okay, note, I get that, and that may not be far from true, but here's the deal. Every time there's a protest, anytime there's a protest, local law enforcement officials are already aware that protests will occur, and they're already on their best behavior and using their investigators to try and find if there will be people in these basically, you know, peaceful protests who will try to make it violent. That's not unusual. Now, if they've ginned it up, that would be unusual. But local law enforcement usually knows these situations far better than the Fed, and they're certainly not going to listen to anything coming out of today with as warped as the DOJ is. Local law enforcement usually are pretty good about it. And, you know, especially local law enforcement who, you know, that are more aligned with the people than with the politicians. And there are some of those. There will be others who aren't, but that doesn't concern me generally. It would concern me, what you're saying concerns me in specific areas if those people who are running local law enforcement have an axe to grind and or are aligned with Donald Trump. Joe Colorado, they are all in the Epstein files. Brother, you said a mouth. I'd love to see those damn things. I really would. As much as I want to see the Mar-a-Lago files, I definitely want to see the Epstein files. It frightens me because if you remember when Donald Trump recently, all of this came out because Donald Trump stepped on his own feet again. He was talking in the White House to a reporter and said that he actually broke up with Jeff Epstein, you know, euphemism there, but, you know, kicked him out as a friend when he showed up and stole a worker from Mar-a-Lago. And who did he steal? It's not that this worker got a better offer or had a resume and went to work for a Jeff Epstein, but it was an underage worker at the spa at Mar-a-Lago that Jeff Epstein stole. Donald Trump treated that person as if they were property. And a reminder, that was the young lady who committed suicide. So this is why it's coming back to bite Donald Trump in the butt. It's because there is something there. Donald Trump treats young girls as property. He already said it. He said it himself. So I want to see what's there. I'm with you. Motley Pizer, does Bolton keep a GoPro cam in his mustache? You know, I don't know, but when he was in the White House briefing room a couple of times, and he kind of reminded me of a certain author who wrote a book, about Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain. He kind of had a Mark Twain look about him, and he does have one of the largest mustaches, biggest, bushiest mustaches I've ever seen in my life. But I'll tell you this much too, during the first Trump administration, when Bolton came out, he knew what the company line was, but he also knew what the truth was and what the facts were. And he often shared facts with us against Donald Trump's advice. And I remember hearing those two yelling at each other one time. I was in upper press, outside the upper press area where you could, you're maybe 10, 15 feet away from the Oval Office. Bolton had left us and had gone into the Oval Office, and I could hear Trump and him yelling at each other. And at that time, I think was Sarah Huckabee Sanders may have been the press secretary at that time. And I looked at her and she just rolled her eyes. So was this coming? This was a long time coming, because Bolton did a lot of things that he thought were right, but there were things that he wouldn't do that he didn't agree with. And Donald Trump can't handle that. Never could. Susan Thompson gifted 5 Mary Trump Media memberships. Thank you, Susan. I love this word. Huzzah! So, huzzah. Dave from Donnie previously said he wanted to reopen Alcatraz. Maybe you shouldn't stay there. I'm telling you, I had this Trump fever dream one time where Trump got arrested and convicted and was sentenced to Alcatraz, and he had a 2-hole golf course there, and he could do whatever he wanted. He just couldn't leave the island. But for 4 hours a day, he had to dress up in orange and stand in a cage, and he made millions as people would come through and take their picture with him. That would be so cool. Anyway, Susan Thompson, $10. Government shutdown, aka Epstein files cover-up. I love you, Susan. I want to hashtag that out all over the place. The Epstein files cover-up, because that's pretty much what it is. They're trying to keep us away from those. Release the Hound, Motley Pizer. Release the hounds and the Epstein files. Release the hounds. I'm with you, Smithers. In the middle of nowhere, gifted 1 Mary Trump Media membership. Gene Hodgson. Question, Brian, if the news wasn't so sad, it would make a great. Yes, I saw that earlier. Gene. I want to thank you for that. I agree with you. And that's my, I'll go back to my favorite, comic there, who said the comic, comedians are becoming serious and the politicians are becoming comedians. Or if you prefer, just quote George Carlin, who said that, the politicians are also owned by the oligarchs and they're just the sideshow. And they are. They keep us fighting over things that don't matter, while they keep taking the money and running away with it. Stephanie Arella, I hope I pronounced that right. Arella? I don't know. The Albuquerque Balloon Festival is on my bucket list. Well, Stephanie, I recommend, if that's on your bucket list, hit the Great Balloon Race in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the first Saturday in May is the Derby, and the week before that, they have the Great Balloon Race, the Great Steamboat Race. There's a mini marathon. What else is there? There's races every day and partying every night. And Louisville, they used to call Indianapolis the nap town, right? It would only wake up during the Indianapolis 500. Louisville will wake up for the week before Derby. The bars are open 24 hours. People party incessantly. They have a great time. Doesn't matter who they are. I remember one year I watched Radar O'Reilly, the guy from MASH, Gary Berghoff, who played Radar O'Reilly, puking on his white suit there at the Derby on the day of. So, hey, go out and have fun. It's a great time. And the Great Balloon Race is worth it. Susie Angelo, good job. And thanks, Brian, to pinch hit for Mary today. Hey, guys, it's always fun here to be with you all. I love your questions. You all are a great crowd. Oh, I'm telling you, good audience. I love it. How you doing? Politicians, Eileen, politicians have become clowns. Well, you said a mouthful there, Eileen. They are. And the thing is, if Donald Trump wasn't, I honestly think watching Donald Trump, he wanted to be two people. I think he always wanted to be the guy who ran Playboy. I think he wanted to be Hugh Hefner. And Hugh Hefner's son said that on a number of occasions. But I also think he wanted to be a stand-up comic. And I always tell this story. The first few months of the first Trump administration, Donald wouldn't stop and talk to us when he wouldn't come into the White House briefing room. He certainly didn't ever talk to reporters, and he would walk out, to Marine One, the helicopter leaving the Oval, like every other president, putting his hand to his ear and pretend like he couldn't hear us. Now, I know from years of reporting that he can. And the first time I found out about that was when Ronald Reagan and Sam Donaldson had a great interaction there one day. Ronald Reagan walked out of the White House with a limp. Sam Donaldson, and he's putting his hand up like he can't hear us as the helicopter engines were. And Sam Donaldson said, "Mr. President, I see you're limping. Does that mean you're a lame duck, sir?" And at that point in time, Reagan turned around and said, "I heard that, Sam. I heard that, Sam. What do you got?" So I knew that Trump could hear me. So one day I saw him in early March of 2017 walking out of the Oval Office. He had on the white shirt, the red tie, his big belly, his hair was in the breeze, the dark suit. For all the world, he looked like Rodney Dangerfield to me. So I said, "Huh, Mr. President, tough room, how you doing?" And he turned around and he goes, "Playboy, what do you got?" And that started chopper talk. I really think in my heart of hearts, Donald Trump wanted to be, you saw him on television, he always wanted to be a comic. And he would never be anything more than a stand-up in a bad Bowery bum bar somewhere in East Biddlefingers. I'm not going to go there. Anyway, so Nanner, what I saw in Chicago, the people were peaceful, the cops were violent. I was in Chicago. I can tell you, you are absolutely correct. And anything that is remotely violent, and it's not, it's reduced to like one city block, mostly where the ICE people are. And by the way, when the National Guard came to Washington, D.C., and they said they pacified Washington, D.C., no, they didn't. It was already pacified. They didn't go to Southeast where there was problems. They don't go to Chicago on the east side where there are problems. You don't see them there. You see them in places where the most violence you're going to find is equivalent to what you would find at a Friday night high school football game. It's not violent. It's the police that are making it because they're trying to gin up a narrative so Donald Trump can do what? Put out the Insurrection Act, right? He wants to enact martial law, and make sure that in 2026, that's his long play, that in 2026, he keeps his one party in power and the rest of us are screwed. Susan Thompson, $5. Be a joyful warrior. Prove them wrong, right? Rock and roll, baby. Either laugh or cry. We'll be here all week. Try the veal. Susan Thompson again, $10. Brian, what is your most memorable experience as a White House reporter? God, that's a good question. There have been so many of them. And each president had one. And I could be here. I could do this for an hour, but I'll give you my very first day in the White House. I walked up. I met Helen Thomas. Helen was a mentor, a hero of mine, Lebanese woman. And I introduced myself to her, and she knew who I was because she knew my uncle who was in the state legislature in Kentucky. And I think my great uncle had helped her family move to the United States. And she was like from Uniontown, Kentucky. And so she knew who I was. You're David's nephew. I know you. And I was so happy that, Helen Thomas knew who I was. And she walked me in. She introduced me to Sam Donaldson. Sam Donaldson shook my hand and said, "Young man, you see that first row in the Brady briefing room there, that first row of 7 seats?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "There's more than 200 years of experience there. Listen to every one of them." And then he said, "And by the way, Helen has 190 years of experience. Helen said something smart to Sam, and Sam said, "Helen, it's okay to have an unexpressed thought." And Helen said to Sam, "When it comes to you, I have a lot of unexpressed thoughts." Now, I didn't know what I was doing for the rest of my life, but that moment was golden to me. Two of the reporters I respected the most, having fun with each other and enjoying the moment. I followed them upstairs to talk to, and by the way, people, this is all my first day. People would bring Helen, the press secretaries would bring her a coffee and donut every morning. She was not only well respected, she was revered by even the politicians. She was up there, I was up there, and Sam was up there and a few other reporters. And Helen started beating on the door to the press secretary's office and said, "Larry Speaks, come out and speak to us right now." This is like spring of 1985. And I was there covering the Simpson-Mazzoli Act. And while she was beating on the door, if I did that today, they'd throw me out. She's beating on the door, and a Secret Service guy came through and said, "You all have to leave. The president is coming through to talk to Larry." So they all turned and left, and I turned to left. I'm 24 years old. I'm nervous as hell. I tripped and I fell, and I'm on the ground, and there's this hand that gets on my shoulder, and I thought it was going to be a Secret Service agent throwing me out of the White House. And I turned around, and it was President Ronald Reagan. And he looked at me, he says, "Well, young man, you don't have to bow in front of me." And now I never liked Reagan's policies, but that endeared me to him personally because at least he had a sense of humor, and we don't have that today. So maybe that was my best day in the White, or one of my best memories, but there were a lot of them. Like I said, I could talk about that all day long, but I won't. But I want to thank you all for being here. Oh, wait a minute, Brian. We just did that one. I think we need Brian to do a video just on his experience as a White House reporter. That would be awesome. Midas Cheryl, I'll take you up on that sometime. I'll tell some stories about being in the White House that'll curl your hair, or in my case, make you lose some of it. And some of it does have to do with Donald Trump. I one time heard him shouting at Rance Priebus about the temperature in the Oval Office. He was wanting to get the chief of staff to turn down the thermostat in the White House. Big difference between then and now. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's always a lot of fun for me. I appreciate you having me here, and I'm glad to be with you guys anytime at all. I'll go in peace. Have fun on the No Kings rally. I'm going to go, if you may have seen, I've been painting today. I'm going to go finish painting a wall in my house. So God bless you all. Have fun, and we'll catch you next time. You can also catch me on Salon. My column comes out in Salon on Fridays, so it'll be out tomorrow. You can also catch me on Just Ask the Question podcast, wherever fine podcasts are sold, and Substack. It's Reporter's Notebook, so follow me there for all the good stuff. And I tell some of those stories, so it's always a lot of fun being with you guys. Again, thanks a lot. We'll catch you next time.